The dust cloud on the horizon was the first sign of trouble for Katherine Sullivan as she trudged along the barren trail, her water canteen nearly empty and the merciless Arizona sun beating down on her fair skin. It was 1875, and the promise of a new life in Silver Creek had turned into a nightmare when the stagecoach had been ambushed by bandits just hours earlier. She was the only survivor. Katherine's legs wobbled beneath her as exhaustion and dehydration took their toll. The distant sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and she feared the bandits had returned to finish what they'd started. With no strength left to run, she collapsed to her knees, her vision blurring as the rider approached. "Please," she whispered, though she knew her voice wouldn't carry over the wind. The rider dismounted in a fluid motion, his tall frame blocking out the sun as he knelt beside her. Through her haze, she could make out a weathered face beneath the brim of a dust-covered hat. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice was deep but gentle, a stark contrast to the rough appearance of his trail-worn clothes. Katherine tried to respond, but her parched lips could barely form words. She felt strong arms lifting her, cradling her against a solid chest as she was carried to his horse. Her breath came shallow and slow. The cowboy said, "Don't quit now. You're safe in my hands." Katherine's world faded to black as the stranger placed her atop his horse and mounted behind her, one arm securing her limp form against him as they rode toward salvation. When Katherine awoke, she was lying on a bed in an unfamiliar room. Rough-hewn wooden walls surrounded her, and sunlight streamed through a small window. She attempted to sit up, but found her limbs still weak. "Easy there," came the same deep voice she vaguely remembered from before. "You've been through quite an ordeal." The man who approached her bedside was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and piercing blue eyes. His dark brown hair was tousled, and a day's worth of stubble lined his jaw. "Where am I?" Katherine managed, her throat still raw despite the moisture that had been carefully administered while she was unconscious. "My ranch, about 10 miles outside of Silver Creek. Name's Brennan Xavier." He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and helped her sit up enough to drink. "Found you half dead on the trail yesterday. Want to tell me what happened?" Katherine took small sips, relishing the cool liquid as it soothed her parched throat. "Stagecoach ambush, 6 men with bandanas covering their faces. They killed everyone else, the driver, the guard, 3 other passengers." She closed her eyes against the horrific memory. "I managed to slip away during the chaos and hide in a ravine until they left." Brennan's expression darkened. "The Collins gang. They've been terrorizing this territory for months now." He set the cup down on a small table beside the bed. "I'll ride into town tomorrow. Let Sheriff Miller know what happened." "Thank you, Mr. Xavier, for saving my life." Katherine attempted to sit up straighter, suddenly aware of the clean nightgown she was wearing instead of her travel dress. Her cheeks flushed. Reading her thoughts, Brennan quickly explained, "Mrs. Abernathy, my housekeeper, tended to you. Your clothes were covered in dust and blood. They're being washed." Katherine nodded, relieved. "I was traveling to Silver Creek to take a position as the new school teacher." "Well, Miss Sullivan, Katherine Sullivan. Miss Sullivan, looks like you'll be staying here until you're well enough to travel. Dr. Jenkins came by while you were unconscious, said you were suffering from heat stroke and dehydration. Needs at least a week of rest before you go anywhere." Katherine wanted to protest, but her body betrayed her as a wave of dizziness washed over her just from the simple effort of sitting up. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense. There's plenty of room, and Mrs. Abernathy could use the female company." A hint of a smile softened his weathered features. "Now, get some rest. Supper will be ready in a few hours. And I'll have Mrs. Abernathy bring you something if you're feeling up to it." As he turned to leave, Katherine called out, "Mr. Xavier?" He paused at the doorway. "Why did you help me? You could have just ridden past." Brennan's expression grew solemn. "Out here, Miss Sullivan, we don't leave folks to die in the desert, not if we aim to call ourselves human." With that, he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Katherine sank back against the pillows, contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. She had left Boston with dreams of independence and adventure, seeking to escape the suffocating expectations of society and her overbearing parents, who had planned for her to marry a wealthy businessman 30 years her senior. At 22, she had defied them all, answering an advertisement for a school teacher in the Arizona territory. Now, as she drifted back to sleep, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake or if perhaps this was merely the first challenge in her new life out west. The next few days passed in a blur of rest and recovery. Mrs. Abernathy, a kindly widow in her 60s with silver hair always neatly pinned beneath a cap, tended to Catherine with motherly care. She brought hearty meals, helped Catherine bathe, and provided clean clothing, simple dresses that were slightly too large but serviceable. On the third day, Catherine felt strong enough to venture out of the bedroom. With Mrs. Abernathy's assistance, she made her way to the main room of the ranch house. It was a spacious area with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, rustic furniture arranged for comfort rather than style, and bookshelves that surprised Catherine with their extensive collection. Mr. Xavier is quite the reader, Mrs. Abernathy explained, noting Catherine's interest. His father was educated back east and insisted his son have the same, despite living out here. "Where is Mr. Xavier?" Catherine asked, settling into a comfortable chair near the window that overlooked the expansive ranch grounds. "Out with the hands, branding cattle. He'll be back for supper." Mrs. Abernathy busied herself with needlework. "He rides into town yesterday, told the sheriff about what happened to your stagecoach. They're organizing a search party to recover the bodies and hunt for the Collins gang." Catherine's stomach clenched at the mention of the attack. Did they find any survivors?" Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "I'm sorry, dear. Sheriff confirmed what you said, all dead. They're bringing the bodies back for proper burial." Tears stung Catherine's eyes. Though she hadn't known her fellow travelers well, they had shared stories during their journey. Mr. Peterson had been traveling to meet his first grandchild. Mrs. Whitaker was joining her husband, who had established a dry goods store. The Byrne brothers were seeking their fortune in silver mining, all gone, and she had survived by pure chance, slipping down an embankment when the shooting started, concealing herself beneath scrub brush until the bandits departed. "It should have been me, too," she whispered. Mrs. Abernathy set aside her needlework and came to Catherine's side. "Don't you say that, child. The good Lord saw fit to spare you for a reason. You honor those lost souls by living well, not by wishing yourself in the grave alongside them." Catherine nodded, wiping away tears. "You're right. I just feel guilty." Survivor's guilt. My husband felt it after the war. Mrs. Abernathy patted Catherine's hand. "It passes with time, though the memory remains." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of boots on the porch. The door swung open, and Brennan Xavier entered, bringing with him the scent of dust, leather, and honest work. He removed his hat upon seeing Catherine, revealing dark hair matted with sweat. "Miss Sullivan," he nodded, genuine pleasure warming his blue eyes. "Good to see you up and about." "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. I'm feeling much stronger, thanks to your hospitality and Mrs. Abernathy's excellent care." "Glad to hear it." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Sheriff Miller sent a telegram to Silver Creek's town council, letting them know what happened and that you're safe. They're still expecting you whenever you're well enough to take up your position." Relief washed over Catherine. "That's wonderful news. I was afraid they might have given the position to someone else." "School term doesn't start for another 3 weeks, Brennan explained. "You have time." He moved toward a side table where a pitcher of water sat. "Town's planning a service for the others day after tomorrow." "I'd like to attend," Catherine said firmly. Brennan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "If Doc Jenkins says you're strong enough, I'll take you." Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat. "Supper will be ready in an hour. Mr. Xavier, perhaps you'd like to clean up beforehand." With a smile that transformed his serious features, Brennan agreed. "Yes, madam. Don't want to offend Miss Sullivan's delicate sensibilities with my ranch stench." Despite herself, Catherine laughed. "I assure you, Mr. Xavier, I'm tougher than I look." His expression grew serious again. "That you are, Miss Sullivan, that you are." As he disappeared down the hallway toward his quarters, Catherine found herself watching him longer than propriety allowed. There was something about Brennan Xavier that intrigued her, a combination of frontier ruggedness and unexpected gentility that defied her preconceptions of Western men. "He's a good man," Mrs. Abernathy said softly, interrupting Catherine's thoughts. "Best employer I've ever had. treats his ranch hands fair, helps neighbors without being asked, reads poetry by lamplight. She gave Katherine a knowing look. And unmarried at 32, which has every unmarried woman in the county setting their caps for him. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. I wasn't— Of course not, dear, Mrs. Abernathy said, with a smile that indicated she didn't believe Katherine for a second. Now, let me help you back to your room to freshen up before supper. As Katherine prepared for the meal, she chided herself for her reaction. She hadn't come west to find a husband, quite the opposite. She had come to escape marriage and establish herself as an independent woman, allowing herself to be distracted by a handsome rancher, no matter how kind, would only derail her carefully laid plans. Still, as she pinned her honey-blonde hair into a simple but neat arrangement, she found herself hoping that Brennan would approve of her appearance. Supper was a pleasant affair, with Mrs. Abernathy serving a hearty beef stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. Brennan, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt, maintained a respectful but friendly conversation, telling Katherine about the area, the townspeople, and what she might expect at the school. It's not a fancy building like back east, he warned. One room, about 20 children ranging from 6 to 16, from town and surrounding ranches. That sounds perfect, Katherine said honestly. In Boston, I taught at a charity school for factory workers' children. We had 50 students in a space meant for 30, with limited supplies and even less support from the city officials. Brennan looked surprised. What made you leave that behind for a frontier town? Katherine hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I wanted adventure, I suppose, a chance to make more of a difference. And your family? He asked. My parents didn't approve, she admitted. They had other plans for my future that didn't align with my own desires. Understanding dawned in Brennan's eyes. An arranged marriage? Katherine nodded. To a man who saw me as nothing more than an ornament and potential mother to his heirs. I chose freedom instead. Brave choice, Brennan said, respect evident in his tone. Most women wouldn't risk security for the unknown. I'm not most women, Mr. Xavier. His smile sent an unexpected warmth through her. No, Miss Sullivan, you certainly are not. The following day, Dr. Jenkins returned to check on Katherine's progress. A portly man, with kind eyes and a bushy mustache, he pronounced her recovery remarkable, but cautioned against overexertion. The funeral service tomorrow should be fine, but I'd advise against traveling to Silver Creek for at least another week, he said as he packed up his medical bag. Heat stroke is nothing to trifle with, especially for someone not accustomed to our climate. Katherine thanked him for his care, then spent the rest of the day helping Mrs. Abernathy with light household tasks. Eager to be useful rather than an invalid, Brennan was absent, having ridden out at dawn to help a neighboring ranch with a difficult calving, according to Mrs. Abernathy. He's always the first to offer help and the last to ask for it, the housekeeper commented as they prepared vegetables for that evening's stew. Been that way since his father died 5 years ago and left him the ranch? Has he always lived here? Katherine asked, trying to appear merely conversational. Since he was 12. His mother died back in Missouri, and his father brought him west for a fresh start. Built this ranch from nothing. Mrs. Abernathy's knife moved deftly, slicing carrots with practiced efficiency. Brennan went to school in St. Louis for a few years, his father insisted, but came back when Mr. Xavier fell ill. Been running the place ever since. He seems very capable, Katherine observed. That he is. Doubled the size of the herd, built the new barn, hired good men. Mrs. Abernathy paused her work. What he hasn't done is find time for happiness. All work and responsibility, that boy. Before Katherine could respond, the subject of their conversation entered through the back door, his clothes dusty and his expression weary. Successful? Mrs. Abernathy asked. Brennan nodded. Twin calves, both alive, mother doing well. He noticed Katherine. Miss Sullivan, good to see you up and helping. How are you feeling? Much better, thank you. Dr. Jenkins says I can attend the service tomorrow. Good. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. I need to clean up. We have visitors coming for supper. Sheriff Miller wants to ask you about what happened, if you're feeling up to it. Katherine tensed but nodded. Of course. I want to help catch those men if I can. Brennan's expression softened. I know it won't be easy to relive, but any details you remember could help. I understand, Katherine squared her shoulders. I'll do whatever I can. After Brennan left to wash up, Mrs. Abernathy gave Katherine a sympathetic look. That'll be difficult for you, child. Necessary, though, Katherine replied, resuming her vegetable preparation with renewed determination. Those men need to be brought to justice. Sheriff Miller arrived just before sundown, accompanied by his deputy, a young man named Robert Taylor, who couldn't seem to keep his eyes off Katherine throughout the meal. The sheriff was a grizzled veteran of both the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, with a no-nonsense demeanor tempered by unexpected moments of kindness. After supper, they gathered in the main room where Katherine recounted everything she could remember about the attack descriptions of the men, their voices, their horses, the weapons they carried. She tried to maintain her composure, but her hands trembled as she described hiding in the ravine, hearing the final shots that ended the lives of her fellow passengers. "You've been very helpful, Miss Sullivan," Sheriff Miller said when she finished. "We've had reports of similar attacks across 3 counties, but this is the most detailed description we've gotten. The Collins gang has been growing bolder." "Will you be able to catch them?" Katherine asked. The sheriff exchanged a glance with Brennan. "We're forming a posse. Several ranchers have volunteered, Mr. Xavier here included." Katherine's gaze shot to Brennan, who sat with his forearms resting on his knees, his expression resolute. "When?" she asked. "Day after tomorrow," Brennan answered. "After the funeral service. We'll track them north, where we believe their hideout is located." Fear clutched at Katherine's heart. "Is that safe? You said there were 6 of them?" "Posse will number 15, the sheriff assured her. "Good men, all experienced with firearms." Katherine nodded, but the knot of anxiety in her stomach remained. She had only known Brennan Xavier for a few days, yet the thought of him riding into danger disturbed her more than she cared to admit. After the sheriff and his deputy departed, Katherine found herself alone with Brennan on the front porch. The night was cool, the sky ablaze with stars unlike any she had seen in Boston. "It's beautiful," she said, gazing upward. "I've never seen so many stars." "One advantage of being far from civilization," Brennan replied, his voice quiet in the stillness. "Nothing to dim their light." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Katherine spoke again. "Must you go with the posse?" Brennan turned to look at her, surprise evident in his features. "Those men killed innocent people, Miss Sullivan. They nearly killed you. They need to be stopped before they hurt anyone else." "I know," she said hastily. "I just worry." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight upturn of his lips. "I've been in worse situations. I'll be careful." "See that you are, Mr. Xavier. I would hate for my rescuer to require rescuing himself." His chuckle was warm in the cool night air. "I'll bear that in mind." The funeral service the next day was a solemn affair, held in Silver Creek's small church. Katherine was surprised by the turnout. Nearly the entire town had come to pay respects to people most of them had never met. "That's how it is out here," Brennan explained as he helped her from his wagon. "Everyone understands how easily it could have been them or their loved ones." Katherine wore a borrowed black dress that Mrs. Abernathy had altered hastily the night before. As the sole survivor, she was given a place of honor near the front, beside Brennan and the sheriff. The simple pine coffins were arranged before the altar, each draped with a cloth. The minister spoke of lives cut short, of the dangers of frontier life, and of the bonds that held communities together in the face of tragedy. Katherine wept quietly, accepting the handkerchief Brennan offered without comment. After the service, many townspeople approached her, expressing sympathy and welcoming her to Silver Creek, despite the tragic circumstances. The mayor, a portly man named Harrison Williams, assured her that her position at the school was secure and that a room had been arranged for her at the boarding house run by his sister-in-law, Mrs. Penelope Williams. "No rush, of course," Mayor Williams added, glancing at Brennan. "Take all the time you need to recover." Katherine thanked him, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers who had become her community through circumstances she could never have anticipated. As they prepared to return to the ranch, Katherine was introduced to Emma Townsend, a pretty young woman whose father owned the general store. Emma greeted Katherine warmly, but saved her most radiant smile for Brennan. "You will be careful tomorrow, won't you?" "Brennan?" Emma asked, her hand resting on his arm longer than strictly necessary. "Father says the Collins gang is the most dangerous bunch to come through these parts in years." "I'll be fine, Emma," Brennan assured her, gently extracting his arm. "Your father should worry more about himself. Make sure he keeps that shotgun loaded under the counter." Emma's laughter was musical. "Oh, he does. Checks it twice a day." She turned to Katherine. "We're so glad you survived, Miss Sullivan. Once you're settled in town, you must come for tea. I host a literary society for the ladies every other Wednesday." "That sounds lovely," Katherine replied, finding it impossible to dislike the friendly young woman despite the obvious interest she showed in Brennan. On the ride back to the ranch, Katherine found herself curious about the relationship. "Miss Townsend seems very nice." Brennan kept his eyes on the trail. "She is. The whole Townsend family has been good to this community." "She seems quite fond of you," Katherine ventured. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Emma's fond of any unmarried man with prospects. Last year it was the banker's son. Year before that, Doc Jenkins' nephew, who was visiting from Denver." "And you're not interested?" The question slipped out before Katherine could stop herself. Brennan glanced at her, amusement warming his eyes. "Emma's a fine young woman, but not for me. Her idea of excitement is a new shipment of fabric at her father's store. She'd wither out at the ranch inside a month." Katherine nodded, inexplicably pleased by his assessment. "It takes a certain type of woman to thrive in the wilderness." "It does," he agreed, his gaze lingering on her face before returning to the trail. "Someone with spirit and determination. Someone not afraid of hard work and isolation." "Someone like Mrs. Abernathy," Katherine suggested lightly. Brennan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Indeed, though perhaps someone a bit younger, with all due respect to Mrs. Abernathy." Katherine felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the fading light of dusk that concealed her reaction. When they arrived back at the ranch, an unexpected tension filled the air between them. As Brennan helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm at her waist, Katherine found herself reluctant to step away from his touch. "Thank you for taking me today," she said softly. "For everything, really. I owe you my life." His hands remained at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "You don't owe me anything, Katherine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "Brennan," she responded in kind, testing the feel of his name on her lips. Something flared in his eyes, a hunger quickly banked but unmistakable. He stepped back, releasing her. "You should get inside. It's getting cold." Katherine nodded, suddenly confused by the abrupt change. "Of course. Good night." "Good night," he replied, already turning to tend to the horses. Katherine made her way inside, where Mrs. Abernathy waited with hot tea and questions about the service. As she recounted the day's events, Katherine's mind kept returning to that moment with Brennan, the warmth of his hands, the look in his eyes, the way her name had sounded in his deep voice. It was foolishness, she told herself. She had known the man less than a week. Moreover, she had come west specifically to avoid romantic entanglements and focus on her career. Developing feelings for the first man who showed her kindness was exactly the sort of naivete she had promised herself to avoid. Still, as she prepared for bed later that night, Katherine found herself standing at the window, watching Brennan's tall figure moving between the barn and the bunkhouse, conferring with his ranch hands about the next day's posse. The thought of him riding into danger made her heart constrict with fear. Sleep proved elusive as she tossed and turned, plagued by nightmares of the stagecoach attack interspersed with new horrors, visions of Brennan facing the Collins gang, outnumbered and outgunned. She woke shortly after dawn, exhausted and anxious. The house was already active when she emerged from her room. Mrs. Abernathy was preparing a substantial breakfast, and ranch hands came and went through the kitchen, gathering provisions for the posse. Brennan sat at the table cleaning his revolver, his face set in grim determination. He looked up when Katherine entered, his expression softening momentarily. "Did you sleep well?" "Not particularly," she admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Abernathy handed her. "Too many thoughts." Brennan nodded in understanding. "The sheriff and the others will be here soon. We aim to leave by 8. Katherine took a seat across from him. "How long will you be gone?" "Hard to say. Could be a few days. Could be longer if the trail goes cold. He reassembled his weapon with practiced ease. Mrs. Abernathy will look after you. When Doc Jenkins says you're ready, she'll take you into town to get settled at the boarding house. The thought of leaving the ranch before Brennan returned disturbed Katherine more than she wanted to admit. I'd rather wait until you're back. His hand stilled on the gun. That's not necessary. Nevertheless, she insisted, meeting his gaze steadily, I'd prefer to wait. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that transcended their brief acquaintance. Brennan nodded once. As you wish. The arrival of Sheriff Miller and the rest of the posse ended their conversation. Katherine watched from the porch as 15 men mounted up, checking weapons and supplies one last time. Brennan was the last to mount, pausing before Katherine. Be careful, she said, unable to disguise the worry in her voice. I will. He hesitated, then added, When I return, perhaps we could speak more about your plans. Katherine understood his meaning, not just her plans for the school, but her plans for herself, for them, whatever them might mean. I'd like that. With a tip of his hat, Brennan swung into the saddle and joined the others. Katherine remained on the porch long after the dust from their departure had settled, her heart riding with the man who had saved her life, and, against all her carefully constructed defenses, begun to claim a piece of her heart. The next 3 days passed with excruciating slowness. Katherine kept busy helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, exploring the ranch buildings, and even assisting one of the remaining ranch hands, an elderly man named Pedro, with tending the kitchen garden. Her strength returned rapidly, but her anxiety about Brennan and the posse grew with each passing hour. On the evening of the third day, as Katherine and Mrs. Abernathy prepared supper, the sound of approaching horses brought them both to the front porch. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, moving at a steady pace rather than the gallop that would have indicated emergency. Is it them? Katherine asked, straining to see in the fading light. Mrs. Abernathy squinted. Some of them, at least. Not all 15, I don't think. As the riders drew closer, Katherine could make out Sheriff Miller in the lead, followed by several townsmen she recognized from the funeral. Her heart sank when she didn't immediately spot Brennan's tall figure among them. The riders dismounted in the yard, their expressions somber. Sheriff Miller approached the porch, removing his hat. Mrs. Abernathy, Miss Sullivan, he greeted them. We found the Collins gang. And Brennan? Mrs. Abernathy asked, her voice tight with concern. He's alive, the sheriff assured them quickly, but injured. Doc Jenkins is tending to him at the Anderson place. It was closer than bringing him all the way back here, or to town. Bullet caught him in the shoulder. Katherine felt her knees weaken. Mrs. Abernathy gripped her arm in support. How serious? The older woman demanded. Doc says he'll recover with proper care. Lost some blood, but the bullet went clean through. Sheriff Miller's weathered face showed genuine concern. He was lucky. 2 of our men weren't Joe Ferguson, and young Billy Tate didn't make it. Katherine closed her eyes briefly, saying a silent prayer for the fallen men, even as relief flooded through her at the news of Brennan's survival. What happened? Tracked the gang to their hideout in the Pinewood Canyon, had them surrounded, or so we thought. They'd posted lookouts we didn't spot. Shooting started before we were ready. The sheriff shook his head. It was a hard fight. We got 4 of them, including Mark Collins himself, but 2 escaped. And Brennan, Katherine pressed, took a bullet pulling Ferguson to cover. Man was already dead, but Brennan didn't know that. The sheriff's respect was evident in his tone. Brave, foolish thing to do, but that's Brennan Xavier for you. Mrs. Abernathy was already moving. I'll pack some things. Miss Sullivan, you'll want to come? Yes, Katherine said without hesitation. How far is the Anderson ranch? About an hour's ride, Sheriff Miller replied. I can take you in my wagon. Thank you, Katherine said. We'll be ready shortly. As Mrs. Abernathy gathered medical supplies and clean linens, Katherine packed a small bag with her few belongings. The thought of Brennan wounded made her hands tremble, but she forced herself to focus on practical matters. He was alive. That was what mattered. The Anderson Ranch proved to be a modest homestead, nestled in a valley with a small creek running behind the main house. Mrs. Anderson, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, greeted them at the door. He's in the back room, she said without preamble. "Doc's with him now. He's been asking for you, Miss Sullivan." Catherine's heart quickened as she followed Mrs. Anderson through the house. The back bedroom was small but neat, lit by a kerosene lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. Brennan lay on the bed, his upper body bare, except for bandages wrapped around his left shoulder. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were open. Dr. Jenkins looked up from his work. "Ah, Mrs. Abernathy, Miss Sullivan. Good timing. I've just finished changing the dressing." Brennan's gaze found Catherine, and a weak smile touched his lips. "Told you I'd be careful." Despite the gravity of the situation, Catherine found herself returning his smile. "This is your idea of careful, Mr. Xavier?" "Brennan," he corrected her, his voice hoarse but determined. "After taking a bullet for me, I think we're past formalities." Dr. Jenkins gathered his supplies. "He needs rest and plenty of fluids. The wound is clean, no sign of infection yet. But that's the biggest risk now. I've left laudanum for the pain, but he's being stubborn about taking it." "Don't like how it makes my head fuzzy," Brennan muttered. "I'll make sure he takes what he needs," Mrs. Abernathy assured the doctor, her tone brooking no argument. Dr. Jenkins nodded, satisfied. "I'll check on him tomorrow. If all goes well, he can be moved back to his ranch in a day or two." After the doctor departed, Mrs. Abernathy took charge, shooing Mrs. Anderson out to prepare a light broth for Brennan while she organized the medical supplies. She gave Catherine a pointed look. "Sit with him for a bit, child. I'll be back shortly." Left alone with Brennan, Catherine took the chair beside the bed. "You had me worried." "Had myself worried for a while there," he admitted, his blue eyes shadowed with pain, despite his attempt at humor. "Sheriff tell you what happened?" "He said you were trying to save Mr. Ferguson." Brennan's expression darkened. "Too late for Joe. And Billy just a kid, not even 20. Shouldn't have let him come." Catherine took his hand, her fingers curling around his calloused palm. "You couldn't have known what would happen. Should have been more careful in our approach. I know those canyons better than most." His fingers tightened around hers. "When I was lying there bleeding, all I could think about was that I might not make it back to tell you." He trailed off, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Tell me what?" she prompted softly. "That I've never met anyone like you, Katherine Sullivan. That from the moment I found you on that trail, something changed for me." His voice was low, intimate in the quiet room. "I know it hasn't even been a week. I know it's too soon and probably unwelcome, but nearly dying has a way of clarifying a man's thoughts." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "It's not unwelcome. I've been fighting the same feelings, telling myself I was being foolish." "Are we?" he asked. "Foolish, I mean." "Perhaps," she conceded with a small smile. "But I've never been more certain of anything than I am of how I feel when I'm with you." Brennan lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then maybe some foolishness is exactly what we both need." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Abernathy's return with a steaming mug of broth. "Enough talking," she admonished, though her eyes twinkled with approval as she noted their clasped hands. "This young man needs nourishment and rest." Catherine reluctantly released Brennan's hand, but remained by his side as Mrs. Abernathy helped him drink the broth. When his eyes began to droop from exhaustion, the older woman shooed Catherine from the room. "Get some rest yourself," Mrs. Abernathy advised. "I'll sit with him first watch." Catherine agreed, though she doubted she would sleep much. Mrs. Anderson showed her to a small guest room where she lay awake long into the night, replaying Brennan's words and the touch of his lips against her hand. Morning brought improvement in Brennan's condition. His color was better, and he managed to sit up with assistance to eat a more substantial breakfast. Dr. Jenkins, returning as promised, pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. "Fever's still at bay, which is the main concern with gunshot wounds. If it stays that way, you can move him home tomorrow." The day passed with Catherine dividing her time between helping Mrs. Anderson with household tasks and sitting with Brennan, reading to him from a volume of Tennyson's poetry found on a bookshelf, or simply talking. She told him more about her life in Boston, her dreams for the school in Silver Creek, and her desire for independence. In turn, he shared stories of his childhood in Missouri, his education in St. Louis. and his father's efforts to build the ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory. He wanted me to stay back east, Brennan confessed, become a lawyer or businessman. But this land gets in your blood. I can understand why, Katherine said, glancing out the window at the sweeping vistas. There's a freedom here you can't find in the city. Freedom comes with responsibility, he cautioned. Out here, people depend on each other. One mistake can be fatal. As I discovered on that stagecoach, Katherine said soberly, Brennan's expression grew serious. Which is why I need to tell you something before we go any further with whatever this is between us. Katherine tensed. What is it? The two gang members who escaped one was Eli Collins, Mark's younger brother. He's the most vicious of the bunch. And he saw me shoot Mark. Brennan met her gaze steadily. There's a good chance he'll come looking for revenge. Being associated with me could put you in danger. Katherine considered his words carefully. Are you trying to scare me away, Brennan Xavier? A hint of a smile touched his lips. Being sensible. Giving you all the facts before you decide. I've already decided, she said firmly. I didn't come west looking for the easy path. I came for a life worth living, dangers and all. Even if that danger comes specifically from knowing me, especially then. She leaned forward, resting her hand lightly on his uninjured arm. I've spent my whole life being cautious, doing what was expected. For once, I'm following my heart. Brennan's eyes darkened with emotion. You're an extraordinary woman, Katherine Sullivan. And you're an extraordinary man, she replied softly. Now rest. The sooner you heal, the sooner we can begin figuring out what this is between us. By the following afternoon, Dr. Jenkins deemed Brennan fit for travel, provided they moved slowly and stopped immediately if he showed any signs of distress. A wagon was prepared with a makeshift bed of blankets and pillows, and with careful maneuvering, Brennan was settled for the journey home. Katherine rode beside him in the wagon bed, while Mrs. Abernathy took the reins and Pedro rode alongside as protection. The trip was jarring despite their best efforts to avoid rough patches, and by the time they reached the Xavier ranch, Brennan was pale and sweating with pain. Stubborn man, Mrs. Abernathy muttered as they helped him into the house and to his bedroom. Should have taken the laudanum before we left. I'm fine, Brennan insisted, though his clenched jaw belied his words. Katherine gave him a stern look. You'll take it now, or I'll have Mrs. Abernathy sit on you while I pour it down your throat. Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. I'd do it too. Brennan looked between the two women and sighed in defeat. Fine, but just enough to take the edge off. I don't want to sleep the whole day away. Once he had taken the medicine and been settled comfortably, Katherine busied herself helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare a nourishing stew for supper. The familiar routine of domestic tasks was soothing after the tension of the past days. He looks at you the way Mr. Abernathy used to look at me, the older woman commented as they worked. Like you hang the moon and stars. Katherine blushed. It's all happening so quickly. Sometimes that's how it is, Mrs. Abernathy said wisely. My Jacob proposed on our third meeting, married 6 weeks later, stayed that way for 42 years until consumption took him. Were you ever sorry for rushing into it? Not a single day. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes grew distant with memory. When it's right, you know it. The heart recognizes what the head might question. Katherine pondered these words as she brought a tray to Brennan later that evening. He was awake, propped up on pillows, color returning to his face as the worst of the pain subsided. You look better, she observed, setting the tray across his lap. Feel better, he agreed, especially now. The way he looked at her sent warmth spreading through her body. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching as he ate with growing appetite. Mrs. Abernathy says you proposed to Mr. Abernathy after knowing him just 3 weeks, she said casually. Brennan nearly choked on his stew. She what? Actually, she said he proposed to her on their third meeting. Ah. He relaxed slightly, then fixed her with an intent gaze. And what do you think about that? Katherine pretended to consider. I think it's rather presumptuous to propose to someone after so brief an acquaintance. Is that so? There was amusement in his voice. Indeed, a man should wait at least, 2 weeks before proposing marriage. Brennan set aside his spoon, his expression growing serious. And if a man were to wait, say, exactly 2 weeks from the day he found a half-dead schoolteacher on the trail? What might that woman's answer be? Catherine's heart skipped a beat. That would depend on the proposal, I suppose. I'll bear that in mind. His smile held promise. 1 week and 3 days to go. The days that followed fell into a pattern as Brennan recuperated and Katherine found her place within the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, began organizing lesson plans for her upcoming teaching position, and spent hours with Brennan as his strength gradually returned. Their conversations ranged from literature to politics, from childhood memories to future dreams. Each revelation, each shared thought, strengthened the connection between them. Brennan's intelligence and thoughtfulness continued to surprise and delight Katherine, challenging her preconceptions about Western men. A week after returning to the ranch, Brennan was strong enough to sit on the front porch in the evenings. They would watch the sunset together, sometimes talking, sometimes lapsing into comfortable silence. On one such evening, as the sky blazed with orange and pink, Brennan spoke of his plans for the ranch. "I've been thinking of diversifying breeding horses as well as cattle. There's good money in Army contracts for cavalry mounts." "That sounds promising," Katherine said. "You have the space for it." "I do. 10,000 acres, most of it good grazing land with reliable water." He glanced at her. "Too isolated for some, though." Understanding his unspoken question, Katherine smiled. "Not for me. I find I quite like the solitude, actually. In Boston, there was never a moment of true quiet, always carriages rattling by. Vendors calling, neighbors arguing through thin walls. And the school in town? Would you miss teaching if you lived out here?" Katherine's pulse quickened at the implication. "I imagine arrangements could be made. Perhaps I could teach the ranch children and any others nearby." "There are 5 families within riding distance with children of school age," Brennan said, a little too casually. "Enough to justify a small school right here on the ranch." "You've given this some thought?" Katherine observed. "I have." He reached for her hand, his touch sending the now familiar warmth through her. "I've given a lot of thought to what life might be like with you here, permanently." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Brennan tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the revolver that now rested on the small table beside him. "Are you expecting visitors?" Katherine asked. "No." His expression was alert, watchful. "Get inside, Katherine, now." The urgency in his voice brooked no argument. Katherine hurried inside, calling for Mrs. Abernathy as Brennan struggled to his feet, gripping the porch railing for support. Through the window, Katherine watched as 4 riders approached the house. Even from a distance, she could tell these were not friendly visitors. Their postures were too rigid, too purposeful. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at her side, a shotgun in her hands. "Ranch hands are out at the north pasture," she said grimly. "Pedro's in town for supplies." "Brennan's still weak," Katherine said, fear clutching at her heart. "He can't handle 4 men." "Then we'd best help him." Mrs. Abernathy checked the shotgun's load. "Can you shoot, girl?" "My father taught me with a small derringer for protection." The older woman nodded toward a cabinet. "Brennan keeps a spare revolver in there, top drawer, wrapped in oilcloth." Katherine retrieved the weapon, finding it heavier than expected but manageable. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked that it was loaded, following the instructions her father had drilled into her years ago. Outside, the riders had stopped a few yards from the porch. One man, lean and hard, featured with a scar running down one cheek, dismounted slowly. "Xavier," he called. "Remember me?" "Eli Collins," Brennan replied, his voice carrying through the open window. "I remember." "Good." The man's smile was cold. "Then you know why I'm here? Your brother was a murderer, Collins. He got what was coming to him." Eli's face twisted with rage. "You shot him down like a dog. After he and your gang killed innocent people on that stagecoach, and 2 good men during the shootout." Despite his weakened state, Brennan stood tall, his voice steady. "Leave now, and I won't have to kill you too." Eli laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You're in no condition to make threats, Xavier. Word is you took a bullet, looking a bit pale there." "I'm well enough to handle you." "Maybe, but what about all 3 of us?" Eli gestured to his companions, who had spread out, hands hovering near their weapons. Katherine exchanged a glance with Mrs. Abernathy. The older woman nodded once, then moved toward the kitchen door at the rear of the house. Shotgun ready. "Get behind the wall there," Mrs. Abernathy whispered. "When the shooting starts, aim low harder to miss that way." Heart pounding, Katherine positioned herself as instructed, the revolver clutched in both hands. Through the window, she could see Brennan still standing on the porch, outwardly calm, despite being badly outnumbered. "I'm not alone, Collins," Brennan was saying. "My men will be back any minute." "Then I'd best finish this quickly." Eli's hand moved to his holster. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Eli drew his weapon, but Brennan was faster despite his injury, his revolver clearing leather in a fluid motion. The crack of gunfire split the air as both men fired simultaneously. Eli staggered backwards, a red stain blossoming on his chest, but his bullet had found its mark as well. Brennan grunted in pain, clutching his side as he fired again, dropping a second outlaw who had drawn his weapon. The remaining two men opened fire as Brennan dove for cover behind a water barrel. Mrs. Abernathy burst through the kitchen door, her shotgun roaring and catching one outlaw in the leg. He fell, screaming in pain. The last man standing turned toward the sound, giving Katherine her opportunity. She stepped into the doorway and aimed as her father had taught her, both hands on the grip, arms extended, sight centered on the target's torso. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil jarring her arms. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to distract the outlaw. Brennan rose from behind the barrel and fired twice in rapid succession. The man crumpled to the ground, his unfired weapon falling from lifeless fingers. In the sudden silence that followed, Katherine could hear only her own ragged breathing and the soft moaning of the wounded outlaw. "Brennan!" She ran to the porch where he leaned heavily against a post, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his side. "I'm all right," he gasped, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "Grazed me." Mrs. Abernathy was already moving toward the injured outlaw, shotgun still at ready. "This one's alive. The others are done for." "Tie him up," Brennan instructed, wincing as Katherine helped him to a chair. "Send Pedro for the sheriff when he gets back." "You need a doctor," Katherine insisted, examining the wound as best she could through his torn shirt. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, cutting a furrow along his ribs, but it was bleeding freely. "Later," he said stubbornly. "First make sure Collins and his men are no longer a threat." With Mrs. Abernathy's help, Katherine got Brennan inside and cleaned his wound, which thankfully proved to be superficial. The older woman bound the injured outlaw securely before checking the others and confirming all three were dead. By the time Pedro returned and was dispatched to town for the sheriff, Brennan was resting in the main room. His color improved after Katherine had bandaged his side and insisted he drink some whiskey for the pain. "You're developing a bad habit of getting shot," she chided, sitting beside him. "At least this time, it wasn't serious." He caught her hand. "You were brave out there. Not many women or men, for that matter, would have stepped into gunfire like that." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But the thought of losing you was more frightening than any bullet." Brennan's expression softened. "I feel the same way about you." He shifted, wincing slightly. "This isn't how I planned to do this, but nearly getting killed twice in 2 weeks has a way of clarifying priorities." "Brennan, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "Katherine Sullivan, I know we've known each other a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, your courage, your intelligence, your heart. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch if you'll have it, or wherever you want to go." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "Are you proposing?" "I am," he smiled, "though I'd planned to do it on one knee, not bleeding on the sofa." "I don't care about that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And yes, I will marry you, Brennan Xavier. I love you too." His kiss was gentle but filled with promise, sealing their commitment amidst the chaos of the day. When they broke apart, both were smiling despite the circumstances. "Mrs. Abernathy will be insufferably pleased with herself," Brennan murmured. "She's been matchmaking since the day I brought you home." "She's a wise woman," Katherine replied. "She told me when it's right, you know it." "And is it right, Katherine? Truly? This life won't be easy." She silenced him with another kiss. "It's right. You're right. We're right together." Sheriff Miller arrived with a deputy and Dr. Jenkins an hour later. The doctor tended to Brennan's new wound with exasperated resignation, while the sheriff took statements from all three of them and arranged for the dead outlaws to be transported to town. "That's the end of the Collins gang," Sheriff Miller said with satisfaction. "You did this county a service, Xavier." "We all did," Brennan replied, his eyes finding Katherine's across the room. The sheriff followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. "I see. Well, congratulations seem to be in order." "News travels fast," Katherine commented, blushing. "Small communities," the sheriff said with a chuckle. "Besides, it's written all over both your faces." After the sheriff departed with his prisoners and the bodies, Dr. Jenkins gave strict instructions for Brennan to rest. 2 gunshot wounds in 2 weeks is excessive, even by frontier standards, he scolded. "Try to avoid getting shot again, at least until after the wedding." "I'll do my best," Brennan promised, grinning despite the doctor's severity. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Katherine felt a peace she had never known before. The dangers of the day had only confirmed what her heart already knew, that her place was here, with this man, building a life together on the frontier. "What are you thinking?" Brennan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That I finally understand what my father meant when he said home isn't a place, it's a feeling." She leaned against him, careful of his injuries. "I feel at home with you." "And I with you." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll build something good here, Katherine. A ranch, a school, a family." "I'd like that," she said softly. "All of it." 3 weeks later, Katherine and Brennan were married in the Silver Creek Church, with the entire community in attendance. Mayor Williams himself gave the bride away, while Mrs. Abernathy dabbed tears from her eyes throughout the ceremony. Katherine wore a simple white dress that Emma Townsend had helped her select from the general store's inventory, and Brennan looked handsome in a new black suit, his injuries healing well enough that he stood tall and proud as they exchanged vows. Her breath came shallow and slow, he whispered to her as they shared their first dance at the reception. "I told you not to quit, that you were safe in my hands. Remember?" "I remember," she replied, smiling up at the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "I'll always be safe in your hands, Brennan Xavier." "And I in yours, Katherine Xavier," he promised, sealing their future with a kiss as their friends and neighbors cheered around them. Epilogue. 5 years later. Katherine sat on the front porch of the ranch house, watching as Brennan taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his pony in the fenced yard. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played at Katherine's feet, arranging wooden blocks in elaborate patterns that reflected her precocious intelligence. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. Brennan's horse breeding program had secured a lucrative Army contract, and the small school Katherine had established in a converted barn now served 15 children from the surrounding area. She taught 3 days a week, balancing her professional passion with her love for her growing family. "Higher, Papa." "Higher!" James called, as Brennan led the gentle pony around the yard. "You're doing fine just as you are," Brennan replied with a laugh. "Your mama will have my hide if I let you fall." "I most certainly will," Katherine called, smiling at the scene. Mrs. Abernathy emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Though her hair had grown whiter over the years, she remained a vital presence in their lives, having flatly refused Brennan's offer of retirement when James was born. "Supper's nearly ready," she announced. "That new ranch hand Carter just rode in. Says the mares in the north pasture are doing fine." "Good," Brennan nodded. That bloodline from Kentucky was expensive, but worth every penny. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The terrifying stagecoach attack that had nearly claimed her life now seemed like a distant nightmare, overshadowed by the joy and fulfillment she had found with Brennan. Their life wasn't without challenges. Drought had threatened the previous year, and occasional rustlers tested the ranch's security, but they faced each obstacle together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed and Mrs. Abernathy had retired to her quarters, Katherine and Brennan sat on their favorite porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. Happy? He asked, a question he still posed regularly, as though amazed by his good fortune. Completely, she assured him, nestling closer. You? More than I ever thought possible. He kissed her softly. You know, when I found you on that trail 5 years ago, I was just trying to do the right thing. I never imagined I was really finding my future. Katherine smiled, remembering how close she had come to death, how his strong arms had lifted her, how his voice had urged her to hold on. Her breath came shallow and slow, she murmured. The cowboy said, "Don't quit now. You're safe in my hands." "And you always will be," Brennan promised, as the night wrapped around them like a protective embrace, the future stretching before them, as vast and promising as the western sky.